It's good to check.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. It's Matt Summerfield here from ZO Church, and we are super excited to be able to run the third in our series, Living Well in Pandemic Times. And we've had two great sessions so far, looking at marriage and looking at emotional well-being. And tonight we're going to be looking at the subject of our connections and how important it is that we have relationships and friendships with people all the time, but especially now. And so we're super pleased that you've joined us. If you are watching live on YouTube, which hopefully you are right now, then why don't you share this YouTube thing on Facebook, or let your friends know, text them. Let's get a whole bunch of people gathered for the next half hour, 45 minutes or so as we push into this subject. But it gives me great pleasure to introduce again the legend that is Dr. Kate Middleton. Kate is one of the assistant pastors at ZO, amongst many other things, but I don't want to steal her thunder. I'm going to let Kate introduce herself. So Kate, thanks again for joining us tonight as we look at this subject. Just for those, for people who don't know you, like where have they been? But if they don't know who you are, could you just give us a quick flavour of who is Kate Middleton?
Yeah, so as well as working with you guys at ZO and with a whole host of other churches all around the country, I'm one of the directors of the Mind and Soul Foundation. So I'm a psychologist by background, and we are passionate about combining great theology, great psychology, but also great medicine, and looking at all this wonderful subject of mental and emotional well-being. And that's not just when you're ill, when it's become messy. It's like, what does it mean to do life well? What do we need to get the best out of our brain, out of our mind, to not just survive, but really thrive, and particularly in life's tougher times? So the recent 7-8 months have been an unusual example of that, but definitely a good example of it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I love, Kate, that you talk about, because we both know how important language is trying to emphasize wellness.
Yeah.
And the importance of wellness across kind of all spheres of life. Before we dive in tonight, share, what do you mean by that? And why is it important that we have a wellness view rather than just an illness view?
Yeah, I guess so often our attitude with emotional health is basically to think of it like there's these two different boxes that people sit in, and most of the time we hope we're in this one, we're like in the well box, but sometimes at some places we suddenly sort of bounce from one to the other and become unwell, and we don't tend to intervene or take our emotional well-being seriously until the moment we hit crisis and we wake up and we're in that box. And we think of it in quite an us and them way. You know, there are some other poor people who are over here and they struggle, but we know, no, that's definitely not a problem. A lot of us would think like that. And the reality is, of course, it's a line. And when life is tough and challenging, like it has been now, things push us up and down the line. And at the same time, there are things that can be protective, that can be valuable, that can help us get the best out of life. And whether that's in the really good times when obviously things are going well, but much more importantly, the more we can understand what the things are that sustain us, that keep us well in life's really pressured times. Because there are times, aren't there, in life when it gets difficult, and they're not always the bad times. It could be that you've just had a baby or you've just started a new job. There's times when life is pressured. And in those moments, understanding how we keep ourselves well, how we sustain energy and enthusiasm, you know, that stuff really matters.
I love that. I just think it's a positive way of just encouraging all of us to think about what is my commitment to wellness and what am I doing? And I guess in a sense, that's what we're doing in this series of 5 or 6 seminar evenings, just exploring wellness in various parts. So here's the thing. Earlier this evening, not literally just an hour or so ago, I had a Zoom. Remember those Zoom calls like we're doing now? Life is just all on Zoom. And I was on Zoom with many of the youth leaders in our church who are responsible for our youth programs. And Alex, who's our youth and young adults pastor, she asked us to reflect on these last 6 months and like what have been some of the highs, what have been some of the lows, and to just capture some thoughts. And I knew immediately what my low was. My low was not being able to properly see people and not being able to hug them and high five them. Like that is what's been so hard. Why? Why is it that myself, all of us, like we need connection?
Yeah, It's been so tough, and I just don't think there's ever been a season like this where we've not only faced challenges but also faced them quite often separated from the people and the structures that we would normally use to support ourselves in difficult moments. And as human beings, we are designed to need other people. You cannot get away from that. And it's interesting because both you and I are church leaders, we're people of faith, and the creation story that the Bible tells of this moment when God looks at everything he's made and there's one thing that isn't good, and it's that this human he's created has no other humans to connect with. And he says it's not good for human beings to be disconnected from each other, and he tries all the animals, he brings them over, but then they're good, but they're just not good enough. You know, human to human connection is so vital. And as a psychologist, it's just fascinating how much our brains were designed to interact with one another as well. How much so much of the way that we're designed is about the fact that we do life in community with other people. You know, you've got cells in your brain called mirror neurons, and when you're watching someone doing something like playing tennis or something, they fire in almost exactly the same way as they would if you were doing that yourself. That's why we love watching Wimbledon or watching the football on the telly. Like, somewhere in your head there's a like miniature Matt Summerfield hitting those brilliant shots or scoring the goal.
For me, it would be more like The Greatest Showman, probably. Just being Hugh Jackman.
That too. I should have known you'd mentioned that. Yeah. But it's like, we are just designed to reflect and bounce off one another. Everything about our identity, the way we understand ourselves, depends on our relationships, our experiences with other people. We're shaped by other people. It's often in relationship with other people that we find those secure spaces where we can grow and really flourish and explore ourselves. I mean, so many of us have had significant friendships, relationships, whether it's parents, mentors, just best mates, whatever it is, who we know have changed us and shaped us and helped us become the people that we are today. You know, relationships, they're just so essential. And we have had this weird moment. I mean, I don't know about you, Matt, but I don't think I had ever even contemplated the fact that anything could separate me from some of my closest friends like this has. It took me totally by surprise.
Yeah, and I remember when all of this was starting to kick off back in March. Do you remember, like, we were debating, do we meet, do we not meet? And you were perfectly able to meet, and people were saying, you know, you just need to be careful. There's no face mask, all that kind of stuff. And we decided to go ahead, but we were telling to people, because we're a family church. We love high-fiving, hugging people, cheering people on. But do you remember we said, please, with everybody, if you gotta do the elbow to elbow thing, you know, just do that. And this is before it all kicked off. And that felt a bit weird to us, but people did it. But then literally a week after that, lockdown happened. And I don't think even then any of us imagined that we'd be in this situation come like imminently into December, where we just, you know, if we'd have said to people, you are not going to be able to hug your loved ones potentially for months, like, mind blown. But talk to us about some of the challenges that have happened, like particularly because of COVID and lockdown, from way back 6 or 7, 9 months ago, however long it was, to now. Like, how has connection been impacted particularly?
Yeah, and I guess we're talking about a combination of two things. So we're talking sort of anecdotal evidence, experiential stuff, but also now there is some early research coming out. In particular, there's a couple of papers that have been released that were written in France, because, you know, they had a very severe lockdown a little bit earlier than us. So there's some quite interesting papers that I've been reading that will be coming out of France. And the first thing is, it's not really a massive surprise. It's not rocket science, but friendships have suffered. People's connections have changed, and there's various ways that they've changed, and one of the most common, and it's something I've been talking about a lot, and then this French paper not only talked about it but gave it a great phrase which I'm going to use, is what they've called friendship funneling. And that's where basically, because of the crisis, you took your broad sort of list of friendship connections and you funneled them into probably 1, 2, maybe 3, a small number of the most essential connections. Because when we're under pressure, when we're having to do things like this, when there's a lot of demands on us anyway, it just wasn't possible to maintain the usual breadth of all of our friendships. So we funneled them right down. And I think that's had a number of impacts. I think most of our relationships sort of flavor, the color, the fun, the joy, the banter in particular comes from those wider connections. It's those spaces who are with people who maybe you wouldn't say are your nearest and dearest, but you would normally have, I mean, think of all the people you used to see like every week in passing at work, or, you know, at the bus stop, or, you know, people you used to play football with, or those little connections, the passing connections that you have all the time. And most people have lost almost all of those now. And they're down to really just a few, perhaps close friendships that they're keeping in touch with. And I think the other challenge there, of course, is what if you fell off the bottom of that, or if there were differences in expectations. So what if you would have hoped that you were one of my like 1, 2, 3 vital friendships, and it turned out you weren't? Some people have found that really brutal, and I've had some desperately sad conversations with people who just gradually realized through lockdown that they were no one's most important person.
Wow.
And, you know, how utterly devastating is that? And it doesn't mean they don't have friendships. It's just about this unique situation. And the other thing that's caused part of that is what I'm calling bandwidth limitations. You know, as well as that natural funneling, some people have been under tremendous pressure in this season, so they've just not had much energy. And we know that in particular, some groups of people, so particularly those who are involved in caring for others, those who've been frontline workers, those who have been trying to do things like homeschooling, have just been so exhausted. Frankly, they have dropped off the friendship radar. So I'll be honest, beginning of lockdown, I spoke to basically no one because I had no energy to do it. Once I'd done with homeschooling and work and everything and all these flipping Zooms, the last thing I want to do is get on another Zoom and try to find some energy to make a connection with a friend. Didn't mean I didn't care about them. But so some people, they might feel like it's just that they didn't matter, but it may be the people they matter to just don't have the energy to make that connection. And of course, the other problem is when we're exhausted and then we're trying to communicate on Zoom, what do? We misunderstand one another, we have rows, or we send a lazy text and it comes across wrong. So we've had conflict as well that's come up because we're all exhausted and we're all frankly just quite prickly and a bit grumpy at times.
The thing is, like, my understanding is, you know, reading around this whole subject of friendship and loneliness, that again, it seems even before COVID, there was almost a global pandemic around loneliness. And that there seems to be something in our culture where actually lots of people do feel lonely. And you know, that doesn't necessarily mean just a single person feeling lonely. You know, people can be lonely in a house full of other people. But, you know, it seems that there's a lot of challenges around this theme of friendship and loneliness and how we make friends and how we have relationships. And what COVID is doing is massively amplifying some of the pain and the challenges around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. So there's a psychologist, but there's a guy called Dunbar, and he's an expert in relationships. And it's quite interesting to think about what does it actually take to form and maintain a good friendship. And he talks about 3 layers of friendships. He talks about just normal friends, then he's got best friends, then he's got close friends. Okay. And it's really interesting. His research would say that in order to get into that close friends layer, so that really proper close supportive friendship, I guess you're talking about the who can you call in the middle of the night if there's a crisis layer. He says his research will show you basically need to see people about once a week. Wow. The best friends layer, he says, maybe once a month. Just normal friends and connections you can manage like once a year. They're probably more the contacts level. But it's really interesting how much work you have to put into friendship. And I think a lot of us struggle to do that just because of time or energy, but also perhaps just don't realize. I think we look in on other people's friendships and think maybe they're just supposed to happen. And actually, so a lot of people feel quite awkward. They're not sure how you form those really close friendships and how to do it and how to make decisions and find relationships, connections that have the potential to grow into that. It's tricky. And I guess for some people, they rely very much on their family connections and family spaces, but doing that across those groupings, and particularly if you're living on your own, if you've maybe moved to a new area, that stuff is actually a lot harder than most people realize, I think.
Yeah. Now, before we start to jump into thinking of what can we do, and interesting already, we've got a question that's come from the chat about how can we focus on making the best of the situation, giving the restrictions that we have. And I guess we're going to jump into that in a moment. But anything else that you want to just reflect about the present challenges of this moment around this whole theme of connection and friendship?
Yeah, I mean, so there's an interesting conversation, I think, around who's found it hard, and I think, or who's found it harder. And there's some interesting misconceptions there that, again, is coming out in research now. I mean, when we first went into lockdown, there was so much stuff. You think about the introvert extrovert thing, like, are you basically someone who quite likes your own space? Introverts, classically, they tend to be more comfortable with their own space. They need their own time. And they, in terms of how they do friendship, they tend to have a few really close friends and fewer of that wider social circle that's sort of around the edges, whereas the extroverts, much more external, would express themselves as having a need more for contact with other people, but their friendships don't tend to be quite as intense. They have lots and lots of friends in that external level. And when we went into lockdown, everybody's like, oh man, the introverts are going to love this. But it's interesting what's happened, and I think both groups have found it hard. But I think what we saw at first is that actually introverts found it, the people who would put themselves at that end of the spectrum anyway, found it harder than a lot of people expected, because when they do friendship, they do it really intensely. And I'm sorry, but Zoom just doesn't cut it. Mm. So I think people really struggle with that. Whereas I think some of the extrovert personalities found it easier, so they're more happy to perhaps go on and do some dreaded Zoom pub quiz thing. I mean, it's my idea of an absolute nightmare, but I think some people have actually quite enjoyed that from what I've gathered. So I think there was that space. But now, 7-8 months further down the line, I'm chatting to a lot of people who would say they're more extrovert, who are actually like, seriously, I actually just don't think I can do this much more. It's just like, I'm literally talking to 3 people. I need more than that in my life. And I think I'm almost now starting to see a swing the other way, that I think, because I would be a real classic introvert, I think some of us introverts have kicked ourselves up the backside a bit and thought, come on, let's do this properly. We can do this. It's not what we'd like to do, but we can do it. And actually, I think maybe that we might see a flick in terms of who's struggling. It's interesting. I'm sure people on the chat will debate that. The other thing that's interesting is the young people. So there's a lot of stuff around. Some young people have really struggled with being isolated, particularly if they've moved to uni, moved out of their context. But actually what we've also seen is a lot of young people managing better, because they use social media so much more anyway. So they were naturally in those spaces. And the same thing we see with older people. So a lot of people think, oh, if you're elderly, you're living on your own, this must be a nightmare. And there are some elderly people who have really struggled. But a lot of people in that category are saying, to be honest, life hasn't changed that much. This is, like you say, this is a group of people who have always been quite isolated, who have always had to spend a lot of time on their own. And I've heard a lot of people in that group saying, to be honest, Kate, this has been my life for years. It's nice that people are now realizing it, but actually I've lived this way for years. And in a way, I've had more contact now because people are reaching out to me than I've ever had before. So it's quite interesting thinking about how this has affected different people, really.
And it'll be interesting to see, won't it, as we eventually obviously come out of this, which we pray, vaccines, healing, miracles, all that kind of stuff that we will. Having had this experience where perhaps we've become more aware of how important our relationships are and our need for people, and as you say, become maybe a bit more aware of those who are more vulnerable and isolated, need that support. You know, wouldn't it be great if there was a revolution in terms of our relationships, and that we thought, okay, actually, I need to prioritize more time. I need to invest more time, rather than waiting for people to come to me. You know, maybe I need to reach out to others. You know, people say, if you want to have a friend, then be a friend. Like, you know, start by kind of reaching out to others, and maybe we may see people investing more time in their relationships because we just realize how important these things are.
And I guess, if we're honest, that could go both ways. I think there are some really good, I mean, I find myself, I'm normally quite reserved and not super sociable, some would say, because I am quite an introvert. I quite like my own space, but I'm starting to become quite gushy. People I barely know, I'm like, we must have dinner when all this is over, and I'm surprising myself. And I think we've all missed it so much. Maybe we will just be superbly sociable for a little bit when all this is over. Who knows? There is another more serious end, though, and I think I mean, oh, gosh, coming out of all of this, psychologically, there's so much we all need to process. Sometimes I just have moments where I feel like I just need to lie on the floor for half an hour and just try and think about what on earth all of this means. And when as we're coming out of this and into a post-COVID world, there are questions that we will have to think about foundationally, about our stability, our security, where we place ourselves. What do we rely on? Like, having encountered a season in a way that we never thought we would, where we have lost people from our life, what decisions do we make going forwards? Do we place our trust back in those, or do we become more self-reliant? And I hope that we can process it and move back to a space where we can rebuild those friendships. But I think we've got to recognize that that's going to take some time. I mean, the studies are saying that friendships will have universally been impacted, but the positive message is that if we make the decision to work on them, to rebuild them, like you say, not only can we get back to where we were, but maybe we can actually end up in a better place because of what we've learned coming from this. But it's going to take some work, and it's going to take some mind work, I think, just to figure out what all of this has meant.
Yeah, and like you're saying, it all demands intentionality, doesn't it? I mean, Amy and I, like we've been super encouraged, super blessed by some of the friendships that have formed in lockdown with many of our neighbours. Like, we just live in a small close in Lower Stondon and just have some fantastic neighbours and people looking out for each other. And when we were able to do so, little gatherings and all that kind of thing, socially distanced, of course. And you just think, like, when it goes back to whatever back is, I'm resisting the words unprecedented new normal and all those other kind of like, COVID bingo things. But just how easy it would be just to revert back where we didn't get to see much of each other. And that's, like you're saying, again, friendships demand intentionality. Like, someone's got to say, actually, this is so good, let's not lose the momentum. Yes, things might change, but actually, it's been good to get to know each other. Let's build upon that. So,
yeah, I think so. And like so many things in human psychology, there's that weird space where in order to step into the potential of something, we have to be willing to admit almost a vulnerability, don't we? I mean, to think about those figures. To really gain that close friendship, you're going to need to be seeing someone once a week, and that requires admitting to yourself that you need someone to that degree, which is quite a vulnerable place to put yourself in. So I think that playoff of self-reliance versus actually I do want to build really close friendships requires a step of faith. And particularly in a context where for some people they have been separated and lost some of those spaces they maybe did previously rely on, that's going to take a bit of practice, isn't it? And the touch thing that we've talked about is really interesting too, because I've done quite a lot of again, I'm not super huggy, but I've been really surprised how much I'm missing it. But actually, there's a lot of studies that I've read that talk about just how vital touch is to friendship. We build friendship through physical connection as well as emotional connection. So when we get, what do you think we're all going to be like when we get back to it? Is it going to be some kind of mass group hug moment? I don't know how that's going to go. Or we're all going to be super touchy-feely. I don't know. It's going to be a journey.
I'm looking forward to that day. So listen, people are watching us now and they're saying, okay, I get it. I know, I feel it. I need connection. I need relationships. And you're talking about a best friend I connect with like once a week, but I'm nowhere near that. I do feel isolated. I do feel lonely. I don't feel like I've got great friends. And obviously I'm under all these restrictions. How can we help people tonight?
And I think one of the most basic things that we can help people with is by saying great friendships come from a decision to work on them and giving time to them, prioritizing those spaces and really taking particular actions to them. And I think that's important because most people think that they just sort of happen by some kind of miraculous chance, because our first experience of friendships tends to be in school or when we're younger, and you're just sort of thrown together, and they do happen more by chance there. But as we get to adult life, we're going to have to be a lot more intentional about those friendships. And I'm aware that for some people who might have had bad experiences when they were younger, that's never been the case. So to do that and start working intentionally on building friendship might feel really quite nerve-wracking, quite anxiety-provoking at first. but it does take work. And what I thought would be fun to do, Matt, if you're up for it, is to go through, there's a little exercise that I sometimes do with people, and I've done this for myself as well, which gets you to draw a friendship diagram.
Okay.
And there's a little bit of an analytical way of drawing a little image of your relationship world right now, and it just helps you think through the connections that you've got and sort of think about any changes that you might want to make.
Let's
so
do
we
it.
have a go. So what you need, if anybody's watching live or on the recording and you want to have a go with this, you just need a piece of paper. It's very Blue Peter here, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Piece of paper and a pen. I have no blue tack or sticky paper.
And I've got a Star Wars very thick book that I'm leaning on. Just
that is what Leo would call extra.
Star Wars loves. It's just it's awesome. I'll try not
if anyone watching is my daughter, just so you know, that is a bit extra.
Okay,
so what you want to do
in
the middle of your piece of paper, this is going to represent your friendship world.
Okay.
So let me just say, super extroverts among you, you may need a bigger piece of paper.
Those extroverts.
For me, this is going to be fine. So, but in the middle of the paper, so what you want to do is write your name and then draw a nice little circle around it. Is this going to reverse or is that going to work? Oh no, that works. Look,
No,
so I've written Kate.
There you go.
There you are, Matt. Okay. And what you're going to then do is start to draw your main relationships on that piece of paper. So
family or friendships?
Well, I'm going to talk you through first. So let's start with family because it's the easiest. So every person who we put on this diagram, we're going to put their name and put a little circle. And the closer they are to you, the closer that relationship is to you, the nearer to your circle they go. So I am going to put a little James circle because those who know me will know James is my husband, so we are married. Maybe I should have done a small overlap than that. He might be a bit insulted by that, but anyway, sometimes your circles will actually overlap because you're so close. There's like no gap. So very nice. When I had small children, I literally drew them like overlapping my circle because there's no gap between you. But so you've got your family people around there. So I'm just going to put I'm going to put C1 and C2. That's for child 1 and child 2 because I don't use their names and stuff on social media. But there you go. So you've got your family there. Now let's think about friends. So you might have some friends who are also on that level. Okay. So I'm going to stick to little symbols so that I'm not divulging important information about all my friendships and upsetting some people and making other people's evenings by talking about them live on the internet. But so I've just put friend 1, friend 2.
Nice.
But you might have, yes, it's good, isn't it? So you might have some other people who are in that very close space. But maybe you're now thinking, and in this COVID season, I would encourage you to think, who are the other people who are normally in your life and where do they go on this diagram? So suddenly you start to think of other people. So I'm going to draw, there's a couple of people who you might draw further out. You might have some little clumps of people. So I've got there's a clump of 3 people who I know who are all in this outside space. We're all friends, we meet up together. There are some peripheral people. So you might put on, so I'm basically making this up now because it's just an example. So I'm going to put work 1, work 2. You might have workmates. So
just a second, Kate. I work with you. Are you calling me a peripheral person?
For all you know, you could have been friend 1 or friend 2. I'm just going to.
I feel now. I just want to know. Am I peripheral? Anyway.
So you might have some more peripheral people. Everybody's one of these diagrams looks different. So don't get freaked out. I've done this and found people who've had everyone in their world clamped in the middle of the paper.
Ooh, wow.
I've had people who everyone is around their edges. I've had people with them dotted. It's your piece of work, so don't worry. So
no wrong.
Anyway, we'll pause there. It can get more complicated. And joking aside, if you can find a big piece of paper, it's easier if you have more space because of what we're going to do now. So now what we're going to do is think about the flow of energy of those relationships. Okay. So to explain that, I'm going to just draw an example on this other sheet. So I'm going to put this is my wonderful mythical friendship with friend number 1.
Okay.
So I've now moved a little bit further out. So let's say that friend number 1 is a really good friend and it's basically a super balanced relationship. So I've drawn an arrow each way. So that shows that it's balanced. If it's a really good, strong friendship, there might be more than one each way. So, there's a lot of information flow here. Maybe we phone each other every couple of days, but it's very balanced. We both support one another. Now I might have a friend
giving
too.
and receiving going on there, yeah?
Huh?
Giving and receiving going on
Yeah,
there.
that's right. Yeah. Now let's say I've got one of those other sort of friends who is still a dear friend, love them dearly, but the reality is maybe it's just something about what's going on right now. Maybe they're struggling, going through a difficult time. I feel more like I give to them than them to me. Okay. So that's got 3 arrows because it's quite intense, but they're all going out from me. Maybe that's a little unfair to my friend number 2. Maybe I'm going to put 3 going one way and 1 going back the other way. Okay. But that would imply that it feels like there's just a different balance in that friendship. Does that make sense? Yes, it does. Then again, I might have friend 3, who I'm putting up here. Now, friend 3 is like a bit of a mentor to me. Someone who maybe phones me, prays for me, does things. So I've drawn my little friend 3 at the top, and that's the other way around. They give more to me than I give back. So we can start to take our original diagram and draw arrows to show the flow of information on those friendships. Okay. And what that starts to tell us is not just how close people are to us, but what those relationships feel like to us in an everyday capacity. So you might have some people who, although they feel quite close, you realize you actually don't, there's not that much flow between you, or maybe there's an imbalance there that you wouldn't want to be there when you actually sit to think about it. Or maybe there's some people who you've put right on the edge, but actually there's quite a lot of flow, and you think, well, that's interesting, I wonder why we're not more close. So it's an opportunity to start to think about what those friendships think and feel like to you and to each other. It would be interesting actually to do, you know, the different, whether we're giving or receiving, like almost in a different color, because then if you could very quickly see, couldn't you, if like, wow, does it look like it's all one color? Wow, all my relationships I'm generally giving, or maybe all of my relationships I'm receiving. And that might be an interesting way of just getting a vibe of the overall picture of relationship health that I'm in. Yeah, definitely. And I think what this does is lots of things. So this exercise, when you do it, it gives you an opportunity to think about the sort of big picture of your friendships. So if you are the sort of person who makes loads of connections with people, but they all tend to be quite superficial, you will probably have ended up, I mean, I've done this with people who are like, where do I even draw the line? Honestly, I could be adding people for the next year and I'd still have more people to add. But then when you say to them, well, who are you really close to? Actually, that's harder. And some of us are really good at making those peripheral friendships, you know, that we're chatty, we're sociable, we automatically do that stuff. But actually, the sort of more intense friendships, putting in the time to do those regular spaces where you really build up with one person or 2 people, 3 people, that doesn't come so naturally. Whereas again, some people might find the exact opposite. They've only got like 2, 3 people on there. And they're all really close. But actually what that does is it puts a lot of pressure on those few friendships. And some people have found in this time that's been their problem. If something else happens through nobody's fault, that means that person isn't as available to you for some reason. Maybe they move away, they get a new job, or something changes in their life, or who knows. It might be nothing to do with you. But actually that could be really destabilizing for you if you've placed a lot of your needs in 1 or maybe 2 people. So it's good to think about then, are there some sort of global changes that you would like to make? And then the other thing that's really good about this, and that I know I have found really helpful, is to think about, are there some friendships there with potential? Yeah. But actually, if you're going to make a transformation in some of those friendships, you're going to need to think about it. So is there someone who, when you put it on, you're like, oh yeah, that person, but oh man, I would have to put them quite far out, but I wish I could put them nearer. I really like them. I wish we could be better. Oh, I can only draw really 1 arrow each way, but I really wish we could be. Okay, so that's a friendship with real potential. And that little catch in your heart that says like, oh, I'd really like to be mates. And we as a culture are not very good at that space, because it feels all a bit awkward. It's like, gosh, you know, am I going on some kind of friendship date? It's somewhere where we don't feel comfortable about. But actually thinking, what would it take to step that friendship up to the next level? And And just thinking about, is there one small change that I could make to that? Could I create a space where I meet up with that person more regularly? Or is there a conversation to have with someone saying, you know, oh, it'd be really nice for us to catch up more regularly and see how they react. And if they don't run away screaming, then that's a good sign, you know. But actually thinking, are there some friendships there which we need to make more space for? You know, we all probably have people in our lives who we really love, but we're all busy. And we do that thing of seeing each other in passing and saying, oh yeah, we must have a drink sometime, and then yeah, we never do. So actually thinking about who we need to invest more time in, how we're going to do it, and when we're going to do it, and trying to make some commitments to that can be really valuable.
And the challenge on this, which you've kind of alluded to, is this does demand risk, because it puts us in a vulnerable place, doesn't it? If we, you know, let's say we've been going to a rock choir or rugby, or there's a coffee shop we go to, because you know, one of the great ways of making new connections is to join common interest communities and all that kind of stuff, which I know is hard right now. But if you make a connection with somebody, you think, oh, I'd love to hang out with that person. But I think a lot of the reason why we don't do that is because we are fearful that that person might say, oh, no, I wouldn't want to do that. You know, I wouldn't want to hang out with you, or what have you. That it demands, the intentionality demands a risk, and that puts us in a vulnerable place, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think if we're a little bit unused to doing that as well, the risk is that what we do is we're too all or nothing. So what we do is we're either completely in our own space talking to no one, or then you get into a friendship where you think, actually, maybe this is a space that maybe I will get someone who I can have a really good friendship with. And what we do is we just splurge everything all in one go. And it's just terrifying. It's just far too much, far too intense. And so that friendship is just swamped. Yeah. Too much too soon, or maybe it was the wrong person. There's a great psychologist who has a 3-step pathway to how to find the right people to take those vulnerability moves with. And I love this. So he says the first step is go out for lunch with someone. Does it go well? Do you chat? Do you get on well? Assuming that goes well, then ask them, would they like to go out for lunch again? So let's say that, yeah, everyone's enthusiastic, you go out for lunch again. Right, when you go out for lunch, he says, you tell that person one piece of personal information, and don't choose like your biggest, deepest, darkest secret, that really complicated thing from your childhood or whatever it is. Just choose one personal thing to share about yourself, a little bit of a story, maybe something that says something about you, or something that's a little bit vulnerable, something you're finding difficult right now, a challenge at work, something like that. And see how they react. And he talks about different types of reactions. You know, they might, so he says one is they immediately change the subject. He's like, okay, that person, they're a superficial friend. They're great. They're going to be great mates to hang out with, have a laugh with, play football with, but they don't want that next step in a friendship. And that's okay. He says, don't take that personally. We need people like that in our lives. People you just have a laugh with, and it's nothing too intense and powerful. So don't be alarmed, just put them in that category. He says the next possibility is that they might start to give you advice. He says those people are coaches. They're great people to have in your life, but it's probably not going to be that balanced type of friendship. They maybe see themselves in a slightly different space. There's a bit of a boundary coming from them. Again, he says, great. Just take that as what it is. They're good people. But he says the third person you have is someone who just really gets you. They listen, they reflect back, they clearly want to hear more. And he says that's the potential space. And he says that's where you leave it in lunch number 2. But you have a third lunch and maybe a fourth. And those are the people who you can build into the space with.
That's good.
So it's really interesting to start to think about your friendships in that almost quite analytical way. And I think some of us that comes more naturally to than others, but sometimes doing something like this exercise and really thinking about it can help. And maybe sitting down with someone in your family or somebody who can help you think that stuff through if this is something you find hard.
And I guess, you know, as we think about doing this, like if again someone's watching and they're thinking, wow, like, you know, that sounds great, but it would seem too much to say to one person, hey, let's go out for lunch or for coffee or something. I certainly found like when I moved here to Lower Stondon, there's only about 15 houses in our close, and I wanted to start to get to know people. So we just invited a group thing and just said, hey, like, let's a bunch of us have a barbecue or something like that. And so, you know, inviting a few people out for a coffee or something like that, where you don't feel, well, I've got to hold this conversation, all that kind of stuff, maybe for some people a starting point. And what you find is very naturally connections and friendships. You find out you've got common interests. Well, there's someone in that group who loves movies or likes cycling or loves baking and stuff. And then that gives you something off the back of that. You say, oh, we should hang out and make cakes, or we should go for a cycle ride and stuff. And so
yeah,
for those
that's so good.
listening who might feel like, oh, I don't think I could do that one-on-one, but hey, start by inviting 2 or 3 people.
That's so good. And actually, I'm really glad you said that, because that's where you start, is how do you identify people who there is potential with. And if you start drawing a diagram like this and you've just thought the problem is I just don't have people in my world, that can feel quite overwhelming and quite difficult. But the first space is to just make connections and step into places where you make the very, very first level connections that have the potential to grow into something. And I think another problem we can have with friendships is because we misunderstand the possibility of the spaces we're in. So maybe there is a space like going and playing football, or a group where you hang out, or like a film group or something like that. And these are amazing spaces to identify friendships that have the potential to grow. But if you want them to grow, you're going to have to do something beyond that space. So yes, we all need to just find spaces we can get into where we hang out with people, lots of people, different people. One of the things I love about church is the potential that we have there to hang out with people we'd never normally get to meet with, people who are older than us, people who are having different life experiences to us, all sorts of different people in the same space. It's absolutely brilliant. I've made some amazing friends that I would never have made anywhere else, because they're people I just wouldn't have come into contact with. So if you are struggling with this exercise, just think, are there some spaces you can get to that you're going to hang out with a bunch of different people? But don't think that's going to be enough. You know, I hear so many people saying, well, yeah, I used to go to these spaces, but I was really sad because no one wanted to be my friend, and the course ended or whatever, and I was just back to it. Mm. When you identify some people with the potential for another step, you're going to have to do something. And like you say, that could be like arranging a smaller coffee with just a few of those people, or going for a walk together. You know, it's so much easier sometimes to have something else to do, isn't it, to hang your friendship on. Absolutely. So I love things like walking groups, book groups, anything like that gives you a space. But just make sure that it's almost the opposite of the friendship funnel. We've talked about it in a negative way, but you almost want to do that in an intentional way, and start with a big group of connections. And then as you identify some people in there who you feel like you've got a link with, like you say, a shared interest, the same way of looking at the world, you laugh at the same jokes, you like the same coffee, whatever it is. And then once you've identified those, form a slightly smaller group. And then maybe out of that, you'll find 2, 3 people. And then maybe out of that, you'll start to find some friendships that have the potential for that real vulnerability. Yeah. And I guess what's an exciting thing to just sort of ponder on as we get to this point of our conversation is the potential of friendship, because I think we miss so much amazing potential because we do tend to keep people a little bit more distant. And actually, friendships can be the most amazing spaces. You know, our culture tends to teach us a message that says that the only really significant friendships are the romantic ones, or the people who you have those types of relationships with. But actually, friendships can have a depth and a connection and a security that can be utterly life-changing. You know, it's amazing. And I always love that there's a verse in the Bible that talks about the greatest type of love. And the most powerful thing about that love is that it doesn't talk about like marriage or family or something, which for some people watching may think, well, that's not been my story, I don't have that. It talks about a friend. It talks about a friend who would give his life for another friend, because that's how close that bond is. Absolutely. And what's brilliant is that sort of connection and relationship is open to all of us. So if marriage hasn't happened for you, don't feel like you've missed it. You can have that closeness. You can have that. I mean, it's love. We don't like talking about love because it's like, oh, that's a bit awkward. I love my friends. Yeah, this is a type of love, a bond that can be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things, again, that, you know, in the original New Testament, is written in Greek, and there are, you know, for us, we've just got this one word, love, but in the Greek, there are multiple words for love. And so, you know, yes, there's love in a marriage context, but there is a love between friends. And you know, we all have this need to be needed and known, to know that we're loved and to kind of give love. And as you say, it's so important for us to say, you don't have to be married, you don't have to be in a romantic relationship for that. But Kate, we're going to start to kind of wind things up. But before we do, let's imagine right now someone is screaming at us on their YouTube thing going, but we're in lockdown. Like, you know, how do I do this? I can't go to play football. I can't go to the gym. You know, I can't go to coffee. Like, is there anything I can do with these restrictions to keep friendship alive, or even start some new friendships? Any wisdom as we start to talk?
And I think that the who, the how, and the when is really useful there. So I think, do think about who, and it may be that drawing yourself a little diagram helps you just think, wait a minute, like who, where are the connections? What are the ones you've lost? And do think, you've probably done the friendship funnel thing we all have. So that was fine when it was just like a month, 2 months, 3 months, but we're like 7, 8 in, and it's probably going to be like 10, 11, 12. I'm sorry, but that is the reality. Even with the good news coming, we've got another few months left, and it's going to be winter. So we need to find some fun, find some spaces, and connect with some people. So think, who are there? People who you haven't spoken to in 6, 7, 8 months, who you used to see quite regularly, who you miss, and think, actually, could I reconnect with them? Think about just throwing the net a little bit wider. And like you say, maybe there's even some new spaces you could get into with a view to making some new connections. Then think about the how. Oh yeah, I'm so sorry, it's probably going to have to be a lot online, but not exclusively. Let's not rule out other things. You know, again, there is good research that's showing for a lot of people who've got Zoom fatigue, and gosh, I can so understand why, who are finding phone calls actually are much better. And when you don't have to deal with your own reflection on the screen, it's less stressful. There's also lots of good research about why Zoom is so stressful, because we can't read the little visual cues. We think we're seeing one another, but we're not really. It's actually surprisingly hard work for your brain. So if you're struggling with it, fine, come off Zoom, phone people instead. It's a great way to chat. Send messages, write letters. Let's be creative about the how, and remember there are more ways to stay connected than just what we're doing, sitting on Zoom or doing a pub quiz or whatever.
You can go for a walk with one person, can't you?
You can. Oh, I'm loving that. That is like an introvert's dream. That I do think is brilliant, because I love those spaces. So I've done so many walks. You should see my walking shoes. They are like caked in mud right now. So yeah, get yourself a good pair of long johns, some good walking shoes. You know, it's like the Norwegians say, there's no such thing as bad weather, just inadequate clothing. Okay. I have a very good woolly hat. That's what you need to invest with. Then get out there with a mate, get yourself takeout coffee, go for a stroll. Yeah, so think about how. Let's be creative, let's be flexible. But in some ways, the most interesting thing is when. And my big encouragement would be book routine. If you have people who are worth doing this with, if you have people you love, if you have people you're missing, you are much more likely to do it if you get into a routine and you say, do you know what? Every Friday at 6 o'clock, let's celebrate the end of the week. We're going to come online. We're going to have a quick drink together. It's just going to be short. You know, we're so all or nothing. We think if we can't sit down and spend the whole evening with some friends, it's not worth doing. But those little check-ins, those little connections make all the difference. So get a regular slot and stick to it, and maybe push your limits. If there's people in your life who you really value, push it a little. So I've got some amazing friends at the moment who, because I knew I didn't do lockdown so well last time, and I'd said, if we do another lockdown, I need to do this better. So they are phoning me every single day, every day. And that's quite hard for me. I'm an introvert. I'm like, seriously, every day. But it's good. Sometimes we need to push our limits and think, do you know what? This friendship really matters to me, so I'm going to invest some time in it. And maybe this is a good season to do that, to push some limits on some things, to explore something new, to recognize, like you say, this really matters to me, and so to invest some time in it.
Yeah, we certainly did that again in our close here, when we were able, kind of between lockdowns, like we had this thing called Feel Good Friday. And literally at 6 o'clock, people had kind of shared their favorite tunes, and I had a big speaker by our garage, and we would blast the tunes out, and people could come out and have a socially distanced wave and a drink, and And it was just something we just look forward to regularly, and really good friendships kind of evolved from that, which continue today. And so, but it was a fixture in the diary. It was this is what we do on a Friday. And it was fun, and it was definitely a great way to kind of launch into the weekend. So
yeah, and I think those rhythms and routines are so helpful, and they help your mind too, both because you know it's coming, so it's like a stepping stone in your week. So it helps your well-being. You know you're going to have that conversation with someone. But yeah, it just, because we're busy people, aren't we, and it helps things just happen because it's already planned. You don't have to think, oh my goodness, I've got to get my diary out and I've got to work out when I can do it and get super stressed over. You're just like, oh yeah, it's Friday at 6 o'clock. That's what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Kate, this has been brilliant as always, and such an important subject. I know you and I are both aware that there are be people who are watching right now or later in the week who are really battling with this. This is hard, and we really hope and pray this has been helpful to you. If you need someone to go for a walk with you or someone to call, then listen, we'll do it. Like, if you go to zeochurch.com/connect, go to /connect from the zeochurch.com website, and you just like someone to reach out to you because you feel lonely and alone, then listen, we'll do it. We'll call you, we'll reach out. We don't want anyone to stand alone. And that's not an invitation to anyone who's got faith. We're not trying to convert anyone. If you just want to get to know some people and connect into a community, then we'd love to hear from you at Zeo. We really, really would. If you go to our groups page at zeochurch.com/groups, you'll see we run a whole bunch of groups, people coming together, most of them on Zoom, of course, at the moment. And again, those groups are such important spaces to make friends and explore life and faith. And, speaking as Kate said earlier on, yes, we are both people of faith. And I think one of the things that is stunning about when we look at the sacred scriptures, the Bible, is it tells us that God can be our friend, that he's not distant and disinterested, but he's up close. He loves us. He cares for us. And so as you think about friendships and the need to not feel alone and to feel connected, maybe, just maybe, consider the possibility that there's a God who is with you right now, who wants to be your friend, if you would reach out to him. And we just encourage you to do that. See what happens. Maybe something amazing would happen, but do connect with us. A final thought, Kate, before we wrap?
Yeah, so I just want to say something for people who, like you say, really struggle with friendships. So I want to just talk about the value of therapeutic space. And by the way, that exercise that we shared, if you would like a printout that tells you how to do it, if you get in touch with us at zeochurch.com/connect, we can mail that out to you. Yeah. But don't rule out the possibility that actually having a chat with a therapist or a counselor about this stuff. If you really struggle with friendships, that can be hugely, hugely valuable. And it's so easy to look in on something like that, this, and think, oh, Matt and Kate's all right for them. Like, they're clearly like super popular. Sorry, I don't know why I'm laughing while I'm saying that. But when I was younger, when I was a student, I really struggled with friendships, and I used to find it really, really hard. I really wasn't very confident in them. I used to get quite anxious around them. I used to find that people moved on, and I thought maybe they were good friendships, and I found it really hard. And I actually did do that. I had a spell of counselling for lots of things, and we talked a lot about friendships and relationships and some of the patterns from my past and what they taught me about those things. So don't look in on us and just think we've always found this easy. If you're in a phase in your life where this is tough, sometimes we all need a bit of help, and someone sitting in on the outside who can give us a new perspective and maybe help us do an exercise like this, and sometimes give us a bit of a friendly nudge and a bit of a cheer on and say, come on, like, get in touch with that person. Let's see how it goes. So if you're really finding this hard, think about, are there some spaces you could get some extra support and help with it?
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you so much for joining us as part of this series. So love your wisdom. I'm sure we'll look at some more subjects next year, but huge thank you for now. Next week, it's week 4 in our Living Well in Pandemic Times, and we'll be exploring the whole pressure around money and finances, which again can be a pressure for us at the best of times, but again, amplified in this moment in lockdown and in COVID. So we've got a guy called Paul Meacham who's going to come, and I'll be interviewing him to get some, explore what some of the challenges are, but what some top tips, some life hacks about doing our money well. But that is next week. But for now, Kate, thanks very much, and we'll hope to see you next week. See you, folks. God bless.